So, what's home to you guys? If you're asked that question, what is a home? What is that? Now, as I was preparing for this sermon, and sermons take a lot of time to work on it. I plan them a year in advance generally. Sometimes in this sermon series I did insert into our schedule this year, but as soon as I create the outline, I start to think about what can feed them. And so I was sitting at the movie theater and I saw this commercial, so I'm going to play a commercial for you guys. Now pay attention to the question that's at the beginning of the commercial. It's right up this alley. It's not road, yeah.
Love and family.
My wife, my family, and fishing.
Home to me means family. Casa para mí es familia.
Home to me means something that endures. Home and freedom.
Home to me is love and family and everything in between.
Everything.
Well, it does. It means everything.
Home means to me comfort.
Relaxation. Just a place to hang out and enjoy life.
Home means to me family time. Tiempo con mi familia.
Having a place to go is a home. Having someone to love is a family, but having both is a blessing.
Hey, this is Annette. Thank you, God, and thank you, Cumberland County, for allowing me to serve you. Come on home. Welcome home.
So, as I was preparing for the sermon, and I was thinking about home, that commercial came to mind, or I saw it, and so I called up Annette this week, and she was very gracious. I figured, since she said, thank you, God, that she was likely a Christian. She says, I'm a Christian, and so she graciously sent me the video, and I just told her what I was doing with it, and what intrigued me. And I want to point out a couple of things to you. Number one, those are all local people. And by local, I do mean this is Tennessee. We are not just the Bible Belt, we are the buckle of the Bible Belt. However, as one of our elders will point out to you, 67% of the population of this area do not attend church anywhere. So the buckle on the Bible Belt is getting a little rusty, tarnished. There's something going on. So, with all that said, here's the number two. These folks were asked what home was, and did you notice what the nature of their answer was? And I can relate. You know, for those who said family, you know, when we moved here, I have to, we're torn between two places. Now, Suzanne was chewing on me one time in a group because I was talking about my heart's in Montana. It's not Montana that keeps my heart in Montana. It is primarily 3 grandchildren, daughter, 2, son-in-law, but yeah, it's those 3 grandkids, right? Family. And so part of what I consider home is not here, it's still in Montana, and we're praying for the day that they're going to move closer to us, right? You can relate to that. One guy said comfort. I love the guy who says fishing and my wife. You know, and, I think I know 1 or 2 guys that might relate to that. Yeah, well, even one who has a bird's nest being built in his boot. Right? Bird's nest? Yeah, your wife told him. So you know, we think about home, and I would say that's one of our roadblocks to being more effective for Christ. Is we have a tendency to kind of think more about here than we do there. And let me share with you how I get there. So here's the our first treasure principle key today. I'm going to read from Hebrews chapter 11, which is, it's known for something. What's Hebrews 11 known for? Yeah, it's the great faith chapter. So right in the middle of the great faith chapter, I'm going to read out of the Phillips translation, just because of its ease of the use of the English language. But I'm going to start at verse 13. And here in the midst of this great faith chapter, as the writer of Hebrews has talked about these heroes of the faith, these people that just looked to God, they had this great faith in God, great faith in His promises. Notice how he describes them, the writer of Hebrews describes them. All these, the people he's been talking about, that he's used as examples. All these whom we have mentioned maintained their faith, but died without actually receiving God's promises. Though they had seen them in the distance, they hailed them as true and were quite convinced of their reality. They freely admitted that they lived on this earth as exiles and foreigners. Maybe you get an idea where we're going today. Men who say that mean, of course, that their eyes are fixed upon their true homeland. If they had meant the particular country they had left behind, they had ample opportunity to return. So, in my example, personally, do you have an opportunity to return? Yeah, but Montana is nice. I love Montana. I would love to be elk hunting right now. Those grandbabies are important, but does that make it home? Just a little, I noticed something last weekend when we went to Albany, Georgia. Now, we used to live in Albany, Georgia. We were there for 10 years. That was home for 10 years. We haven't been back since 1996. So as we rolled into Albany, Georgia, it was amazing how much this town had changed. And we still have connections there. We still have some dear friends, particularly a dear church family that's still in Albany, Georgia. But we got there, and have you done that before? It's not the same, right? And we do have that ability in this life. We could return to home, but the writer of Hebrews is talking about something else. No, the fact is they long for a better country altogether. Nothing less than a heavenly one. And because of this faith of theirs, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for in sober truth, He has prepared them a city in heaven. And I would say to you, that's true for us too. Our problem, though, is it's awful easy, isn't it, to get attached to this place and really get consumed with the stuff we've got and the things we do and all these earthly sort of things that sometimes we get confused about the nature of home. Sometimes we put our roots down so deeply here in the temporal, in the temporary, that we forget there's an eternal place for us that God has prepared. And isn't it true? I mean, if you really think about it, if you want to be brutally honest, isn't it true that sometimes our excuses for not doing stuff in God's kingdom, for His kingdom, is related a lot of times to our earthly sort of tie-downs? You know, how many times have we, well, I can't do that because I've got this commitment. I've got to do this at home, or I've got to do this at the house, or this is tying me down, rather than do something wonderful for God and for God's people. Just hold on to that. So here's that first treasure principle key. I'm just going to put a name to it. And that is, heaven, not earth, is my home. I think that would be a good thing to write down. It might even be in a book someplace, the book that we're studying. Look at Philippians chapter 3, verse 20. And Paul, writing to the Philippian church, says this, but our citizenship is in where? Yeah. From which we also eagerly wait for a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. Do you realize how often the New Testament writers talk about this concept? That we are, you know, one of the things that we kind of throw out, we're strangers in a strange land. You know, here's one of our little tells. You know, if you think of this kind of like a poker game, and you're playing poker and you don't have a very good poker face, this is one of our poker faces. Sometimes we get so bent out of shape about how our culture is changing that and there's nothing wrong with that. Believe me, I'm 60 years old. I grew up in the good old USA, and I live with, man, things were different back then, right? Haven't you said something like that? Things were different back then. People did this or did that. But on some stuff, do we need to be quite so concerned that it's slipping away? Because isn't ultimately all of it going to slip away? Everything. Other than people, and by the way, and only the people that have surrendered to Christ, everything burns up. It's all going to go bye-bye. So a lot of the things that we care about and we want to preserve as if there's a forever for them, the truth is we're spending a lot of energy preserving something that's not going to last, right? And that's the way the New Testament writers talked. They kept talking about a future, this heavenly abode with God, and that's all they talked about. The book of Revelation, that's pretty much the sum total of the book of Revelation. Just talking about and describing heaven, what's going to happen. So you got it? So just as an observation, I decided to pull an Old Testament writer in. And so here's a guy who was very wise. He was also very, very rich. He was so rich. Can you imagine being so rich that people would travel from far countries just to come and see how rich you were? Now think about it. That you are a tourist attraction. Hey, Bill, is that happening at your house? Are you a tourist, pretty much? Yeah. Again, Anna, it's just, no, really, Solomon was a tourist attraction. It's like, man, I feel like doing something different for our vacation this year. Well, what do you want to do? Disney World? Let's go see Solomon. I kind of want to check out what it's like to have somebody with a ton of money, right? And so that's the way Solomon was. He's super rich. But he's got an interesting perspective on all of this. So let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5. By the way, the book of Ecclesiastes, if you're depressed, it's not necessarily the greatest book to go to as a first try. Just so you know, you might want to make sure that if you read anything in the book of Ecclesiastes, you know how we are. A lot of times we choose the wrong time of the day to read the Bible. So for those of us who finally catches up at the end, I haven't read my Bible yet today. It's the end of the day. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to read my Bible in bed. And the next thing you know, it's laying on your face, right, and you're snoring. Don't do that with Ecclesiastes unless you read the last chapter of Ecclesiastes, before you fall asleep. It's that depressing. So Ecclesiastes chapter 5, richest man in the world, wisest man in the world, and he says this: the one who loves money is never satisfied with money. Are you speaking from experience, Solomon? Yes. And whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with income. This too is, what's the word he uses? Futile, vanity. Yeah, I actually love that translation better for that. This too is futile, it's vanity. When good things increase, the ones who consume them multiply. What then is the profit to the owner except to gaze at them with his eyes? So apparently Solomon did the same thing. People were coming to look at his treasures, and for a while he just kind of sat there. He says, what are we going to do today? I don't know. I'm going to go to my treasure room and just kind of, I'm going to light a cigar, sit in the recliner, and just stare at the money. And so what's he say about that? You know, when good things increase, the ones who consume them multiply, but then it's profit to the owner except to gaze at them with his eyes. And that's all it does for you. The sleep of the worker is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich permits him no sleep. So apparently it kept them up at night. By the way, in the book, The Treasure Principle, Alcorn does a great job of listing rich people throughout history who have famous quotes that seem to coincide with Solomon. So here's all these folks who had tremendous amount of wealth, and guess what they said about the tremendous amount of wealth? Well, yeah, it kind of ran them into the ground. It just worried them to death. If you haven't gotten the book, there's still 5 copies back there. Get a copy. It'll open your eyes. There is a sickening tragedy I have seen under the sun. Wealth kept by its owner to his harm. That wealth was lost in a bad venture, so when he fathered a son, he was empty-handed. As he came from his father's womb, so he will go again. Naked as he came, he will take nothing for his efforts that he can carry in his hand. Well, that's pretty depressing, Solomon. I'm not sure I'm encouraged. You mean I don't get to put the U-Haul behind my hearse? I don't get to, I don't get to accumulate all this wealth. Let me just illustrate, I think, one of the ways that this just goes deep, deep, deep in our psyche. How many times have you heard someone say that what they wanted to leave their children was a condition better than they had? All I know is I want my kids to have it better than I do. You know, that's pretty incredible in our culture, considering the vast majority of the world would consider us rich people. And being rich, we still want more. Just, if you really want to humble it, you know, you're struggling maybe with the way your finances are going. And I'm not saying we're well-heeled, but we do remember the days when there was more week than there was paycheck. I mean, how many of you remember that? And maybe you're even living in it now. No? Right? So, pretty incredible times. But can you imagine trying to feed a family of 4 on less than $2 a day? That when your kids give thanks for the meal that they would get, they do it with the idea that they don't know if they will ever get another meal again. You know, when we give thanks for a meal, how many times have you sat down to dinner and you're sitting down to dinner and you give it thanks for dinner and maybe you hold hands and you pray, but aren't you pretty confident that tomorrow morning there's going to be breakfast on the table? For half the world, that's not true. And we complain that what we've got isn't enough and we want to leave our kids more. Is maybe there's something wrong with that? Particularly in light of what Solomon has to say. You know, having a bunch of stuff doesn't do you a whole lot of good. You can sit in a room, you can stare at it, but you know when you die, you're going to go naked, and there's none of that stuff you've accumulated that you're going to take with you. That's pretty depressing, Solomon, right? And so what does Paul say in Philippians? He says, hey, look, remember there's something else out there. Here's the big idea. Remember my illustration a couple of weeks ago with the rope? And I had, here's the rope and it just goes on forever and ever and ever. It's on a spool right now, but there's no end to this spool. This right here, we're going to call the dot. And this dot is your life. So we're going to talk about the dot right now. How did the New Testament writers talk about this dot? Well, here's Paul again in Colossians says this. Therefore, put to death what belongs to your worldly nature. The dot. Worldly dot. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desire, and what's that word? Greed. Oh, wait. I thought you were just after, well, people who were sexually immoral. Those are the ones we're supposed to hate, right? But impurity, lust, evil desire, and greed. which is, what is it? Idolatry. Do you realize that that checkbook you've got might be your God? Do you realize that house that you have might be your God? Do you realize that some of those goals that you might be living with for this little dot that's right here might be your God? Now let's change things up a little bit and let's live for the line. Let's live for eternity. So here's the rest of the Colossians. And by the way, I've changed the New Century Version for this reading. Since you were raised from the dead with Christ, aim at what is in where? Heaven. Look for the line. Where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. I mean, if you want to go and stare something, which is better, by the way, to stare at? If you're going to pull up a recliner and you're going to light up a cigar, and I don't necessarily think God's going to be upset if you light up a cigar in His presence. He might even light it for you. I don't know. You know, when you got perfect bodies and they're not open to, falling apart or disease, maybe He's the one who's, smoking a cigar. I don't know. Yeah, there you go. And He might be sitting on a Harley. I don't know. What's the heavenly version of a Harley? I don't know. So you're sitting there. Wouldn't it be better to go and sit and just kind of converse with Jesus rather than look at what you've got in the bank account? Think only about the things in heaven, not the things on earth. Your old sinful self has died, and your new life is kept with Christ in God. Christ is your life. When He comes again, you will share in His glory. So put all evil things out of your life. Sexual sinning, doing evil, letting evil thoughts control you. See, a different translation, it just kind of, we understand some of these words a little differently, don't we? Same verses we just read. Wanting things that are evil and greed. This is really serving a false God. These things make God in a fair fight. Is anybody in here was under the illusion in a fair fight with God, you're going to come out the winner? Okay, I just want to know who I'm dealing with here. Didn't think so. In your past evil life, you also did these things. And another way of saying this is Paul's just saying, that was the old you. It's not supposed to be the new you. But now put these things out of your life. Anger, bad temper, doing or saying things to hurt others, and using evil words when you talk. Did you realize that's a dot sort of mentality, all those things? You're living for the flesh. That's the dot, that's not the line. Do not lie to each other. You have left your old sinful life and the things you did before. You have begun to live the new life in which you are being made new and are becoming like the one who made you. This new life brings you the true knowledge of God. In the new life, there is no difference between Greeks and Jews, those who are circumcised and those who are not circumcised, or people who are foreigners or Scythians. There's no difference between slaves and free people, but Christ is in all believers. And Christ is all that is important. Remember that passage we quote a lot, Acts chapter 2, and repent and be baptized, every one of you, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit is dwelling within us. Isn't this interesting? Now we have another verse that says Jesus is in there too. It's kind of crowded. Guys, what's going on in there? And yet there's other verses that say God's there too. So, hey, what are you guys doing? Is there a party I don't know about? Right? The difference between slaves and free people, but Christ is in all believers, and Christ is all that is important. God has chosen you and made you His holy people. He loves you, so you should always clothe yourselves with mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. That's living for the line. Bear with each other. And by the way, that doesn't mean you come and take somebody's load off of them. That means if somebody's struggling with something, what are we supposed to do as Christians? We come and we just come alongside them. We take part of the load off. They're still carrying their load. We don't solve it for them. That doesn't solve anything. Rather, we come alongside and we help to bear the load. So bear with one another. Forgive each other. If someone does wrong to you, forgive that person because the Lord forgave you. How much of a command is that? Matthew chapter 6 is a tough one. It says if you don't forgive, guess what also happens to you? You don't get in heaven. Even more than all this, clothe yourself in love. Love is what holds you all together in perfect unity. Let the peace that Christ gives control your thinking, because you were all called together in one body to have peace. Always be thankful. Let the teaching of Christ live in you richly. Use all wisdom to teach and instruct each other by singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. I toyed with two different passages. What's ironic was both passages, both Colossians and Ephesians, used the same language. Did you realize, you know what, I just now thought of this. Maybe God just used this opportunity with Sam to kind of drive home this lesson about singing. Do you realize that when you sing, it's not for you? A lot of times, you want to live for the dot. We say, you know, I really would love for you to play this sort of music, or I want you to play this style, or I want you to do it this way. And that's saying, I want it. That's a dot mentality. But did you read what this passage just said? Let the teaching of Christ dwell in you. Use all wisdom to teach and instruct each other by singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Ephesians adds this, that we do this for one another. You're not singing for you, and you're not singing for God. You are, but you're singing for one another. Shouldn't that change the way that you sing and worship? That when you sing, you're encouraging Tom. And Tom, when you sing, you're encouraging Jill. And Jill, when you sing, you're encouraging John. He needs a lot of encouragement. And you see how that works? But we're teaching also. Why? Because those sort of things that the Christian practices are living for the line, not for the dot. And how can you tell the difference between a Christian who's maybe a little too worldly? They're living for today, and they want a lot for themselves. But the Christian who's living for eternity is doing a lot for other people. Is that, by the way, just money? No. I would say it's just about everything. So with that in mind, here's the final thought. I should live not for the dot, but for the line. Are you living for the line? Let's play that last song when I get finished praying. The one I eliminated. And we'll be done. If you have questions, just go ahead and stand. And if you have questions today, if you want to know more, you just want to know who we are, I'll stay up here and you guys can come and see. Father, I give you thanks. We pray, Father, that if we're not getting out of our own comfort zone, we're giving you the okay, Dad, that you're going to get us out of our comfort zones. Father, if we're living for the dot, we need a wake-up call. We need you to just get us stirred up and get us alive and start to live the way you want us to live for the line. So, Father, you also motivate us to get out of the comfort zone and to live for our line, to live for eternity. We give you thanks. In Jesus' name, amen. It's not there? Well, then go away. Go home.
Well, that was to the point. Do it quick. Up to the doctor. That sounds good.
At least one.